Biogeography. Biogeography is distribution of living organisms on Earth. Also, Earth is huge, so we can find isolated islands all over it. For example, Shakirs that born in 73 found Massateria and Jonas Island. By chance, he found interesting native life in this environment. Nowadays, we found 5 species of birds, 126 species of plants, 4 cells, and a handful of insects. But we don't find any native amphibians, reptiles, and mammals there. As it shows here, there are 2 main patterns here. Marsupial mammals in Australia and placental mammals in other regions. Also, there are odd and unbalanced flora and fauna in oceans islands. So we see in these census places similar species of animals. They are related by a common ancestor. They live in these places because of the similar of terrain and climate. Darwin shows up whenever we talk about evolution. He learned of ideas related to evolution when he traveled with the HMS Beagle. The truth that evolution could explain the organism and forms of species, as well as their distribution across the globe. He also mentioned new chapter of evolution, the origin. The origin means find of documents to support the biogeography. At that time, there are many different ideas about distribution. Louis Agassiz assumed that species were immutable and static, so they remaining at or near their site of creation. There are many facts to disapprove this theory. For example, after time, huge amounts of fossils were found, which shows that organisms can or do change or move. Darwin found a fossil seashell in the Andes, which means that the mountain was underwater, so lands can sink and rose. Now Darwin agreed of distribution of species, but he mentioned the species were not created, they evolve. In the other words, plants and animals move to different parts of Earth and evolve into new species. But how? Similar or long-distance species who share common ancestor. And now there are some examples. Rheus and emus in Africa and South America and Australia that share common flightiness ancestry. One more example is plants. The plant tulip trees and skunk cabbage in eastern China and eastern North America. Also, there is a gap between these 2 areas. Darwin has no idea about the age of evolution or time of distribution. Nowadays, by using DNA and protein sequences, scientists can find evolution relationship between a species and approximal time when they diverge from common ancestry. Technically, as a species derive from their common ancestral DNA sequence change. By using fossils and molecular clock method, we can find ways things from distribution of species to movement of glaciers and formation of land bridge. The connection between the evolution of species and distribution can be supported by biogeography.
This section explains how if you go to 2 distant areas with similar climate and terrain, you will see different wildlife. For example, if you travel to distant deserts, you'll find that they have different types of succulents despite the fact that they are very similar. The argument that the deserts appear similar while behaving differently isn't enough to explain the differences, since transplanted cacti in distant deserts will still thrive. Marsupials and placental animals are prime examples of this disparity, since although they are vastly different in terms of anatomy and reproduction, they still look similar and fulfill similar ecological roles. This is one area where creationism falls short. A creationist argument cannot explain how fundamentally different types of wildlife from fundamentally different regions still share similar forms and functions. However, evolution can explain these differences by citing convergent evolution, which states that species that occupy similar habitats will experience similar selection pressures and end up looking and behaving well, similarly. This does not mean, however, that these species are related. There are three parts of the theory of evolution that come into play in convergent evolution. Common ancestry, which explains the base similarities between different species such as marsupials and placentals. Speciation, which describes how a common ancestor can radiate into many different new species. And natural selection, which helps mold these species to their environments. With these three explanations, we have a simpler way to understand how this type of biogeographic distribution works. The next question that arises is, what about the very similar species that live on separate land masses? This can be explained by the existence of land connections between continents that have since been lost, and the breaking apart and drifting of prehistoric continents. Upon dispersing and colonizing a new area, organisms tend to evolve to fit their surroundings. Therefore, species currently living in an area will resemble fossils found of similar species in that area. This observation led to Darwin's hypothesis, the descent of man, that humans evolved in Africa, which was later found to be true. The next argument handles continental drift, which is a mechanism for vast dispersal of species. The theory of continental drift is supported by glacial scratches across land masses, which don't make sense unless you look at them in context with land masses being in different locations earlier in Earth's history. Additionally, the Glossopteris tree, which are widely dispersed around continents in the southern hemisphere. It makes less sense for the Glossopteris to have migrated to these distant places than if continental drift somehow separated them.
Realizing that the distribution on islands provides conclusive proof that evolution was one of the greatest pieces of sleuthing in the history of biology. But before we get to the evidence, we need to distinguish two types of islands. The first are continental islands. Those islands once connected to a continent, but later separated by either rising sea levels that flooded former land bridges or by moving continental plates. On the other hand are those that were never connected to a continent, called oceanic islands, which arose from the seafloor, initially bereft of life as roaring volcanoes or coral reefs. Oceanic islands are missing many types of native species that we see on both continents and continental islands. Take Hawaii. The islands are well stocked with native birds, plants, and insects, yet they completely lack native freshwater fish, amphibians, reptiles, and land mammals. As Darwin noted, the disparity is hard to explain under a creationist scenario. Continental islands do have these animals, so why would a creator put different types of animals on continental versus oceanic islands? How the island was formed shouldn't make a difference, but mammals, amphibians, freshwater fish, and reptiles often do very well when humans introduce them to oceanic islands. In fact, they often take over, wiping out native species. Introducing rats and mongooses in Hawaii have destroyed or endangered many of their spectacular birds. Although oceanic islands lack many basic kinds of animals, the types that are found there are often present in profusion, comprising of many similar species. Take the Galapagos. Among its 13 islands, there are 28 species of birds found nowhere else, and of these 28, 14 belong to a single group of closely related birds, the famous Galapagos finches. No continent or continental island has a bird fauna so heavily dominated by finches. Oceanic islands are missing many groups of species that live on continents and continental islands, yet the groups that are found are replete with many similar species. Together, these observations show that compared to other areas of the world, life on oceanic islands is unbalanced. Plants, birds, insects, and other arthropods are native to oceanic islands. Land mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and freshwater fish are missing. By looking at this, we can infer that the species in the first column can colonize an oceanic island through long-distance dispersal. The species in the second column lack this ability. Birds are capable of flying great distances over sea, plants can get to islands as seeds, insects too can fly to islands or be carried by winds. In contrast, land mammals and reptiles are heavy and can't swim very far, and freshwater fish simply can't survive in salt water. Further, when you look at the type of insects and plants native to oceanic islands, they are from groups that are the best colonizers. Most of the insects are small, precisely those that would be easily picked up by wind. Terrestrial mammals are not good colonizers, and that's why oceanic islands lack them. But they don't lack all mammals. Aerial mammals do occur on almost every island. New Zealand possesses 2 bats found nowhere else in the world, because while terrestrial mammals cannot be transported across a wide space of sea, bats can fly across. Aquatic mammals also are seen on islands. In Hawaii, the endemic mock seal can be found, and in Juan Fernandez, a native fur seal can be found. These mammals find their way through islands through swimming, allowing them to be able to colonize through long-distance dispersal. If dispersal were common, life on oceanic islands would be quite similar to that of continents and continental islands. Nevertheless, most oceanic islands have been around for millions of years, long enough to permit some colonization. With few exceptions, the animals and plants on oceanic islands are most similar to species found on the nearest mainland. For instance, the Galapagos Islands hold many species that resemble those from the west coast of South America. The similarity cannot be explained by the arguments that the islands in South America have similar habitats because the Galapagos are dry, treeless, and volcanic, while the Americas contain lush tropics. What is true of the Galapagos is also true of other oceanic islands. However, given the vagaries of winds and the direction of ocean currents, we don't expect every island colonist to come from the closest source. 4% of Hawaiian plant species, for example, have their closest relatives in Siberia or Alaska. To sum up, oceanic islands have unbalanced biotas. They are missing major groups of organisms, and the same ones are missing on different islands. The types of organisms that are present often comprise of similar species called radiation, and they often are the types of species that disperse most easily through large stretches of ocean. Species most similar to those inhabiting oceanic islands are usually found on the nearest mainland, even if the habitats are different. The inhabitants of oceanic islands descended from earlier species that colonized the islands, usually from nearby continents in distance dispersal. Once there, accidental colonists formed many species because oceanic islands offer lots of empty habitats that lack competitors and predators. However, it is important to remember that these patterns do not generally hold for continental islands.
To summarize, biogeography is the diversity of life on continents and islands. Also, this distribution is the result of chance and lawfulness. Chance can be winds, currents, or etc. Chance caused finches to arrive to Hawaii or lemur-like species to move to Madagascar. So chance and lawfulness and time are used for Robinson Crusoe's effect. Lastly, in addition to chance, humans not only destroy habitats or hunt, humans also bring animals and plants to isolated places like isolated islands and causes their native organisms to become extincted or extincted soon. For example, Hawaiian honeymoon crabs and Calpus kiwis in New Zealand and many other rare plants in danger of extinction. Lastly, unfortunately, we lost some evidence that represents million years of life on Earth.